afternoon from Johannesburg, South Africa. Good morning to some of you and good evening. Welcome to this Laudato week webinar. My name is Lyndon Muma. I am serving as the Director of Advocacy with the Global Catholic Climate Movement. It's a pleasure to have you on board and welcoming you from all over the continent, from our common home into this webinar. And I have such an awesome August panel. With me today, we'll be speaking about fossil fuel, divestments, and energy and human rights. And yes, just a really great time to celebrate the divestment of fossil fuel with the Catholic institutions and other faith-based institutions. Before I proceed, I would like to invite you all to get into the translation guide. This event is being translated into English, Espanol, Portuguese, Italian, Francais, Polish, and Vietnamese. Yeah. So please do make sure you pick the language of your choice to follow the events. And also there's a comment section right there, and you can make comments. Please do tell us where you're dialing in from, where you're calling in from. Please do put in comments and questions, and we're going to take your questions at the almost in between at the tail end of this event. So wonderful. I'm just so happy to have you all and to celebrate Laudato Si week with you. This webinar really seeks to highlight connections between ongoing divestment in fossil fuel, the COVID-19 crisis, biodiversity crisis, and the climate emergency. It's also a call to action. It's a call to attention on the dangerous work practices of the fossil fuel industry, and to highlight how the fossil fuel industry is accelerating the climate crisis. And we are so glad. It's such a timely moment to have this conversation, because we can see that there is a shift in the world. Just yesterday, the International Energy Agency released a landmark report that says that we do not need fossil fuel going into the future if we have to meet net zero. And I have this August panel with us to be able to speak more on this topic, and also to speak about the Catholic divestment. If you all are following JCCM, you realize that there was an announcement that went out on the past Monday, about 31 Catholic faith-based institutions that have divested from fossil fuel. We're so happy about this movement that is growing every day, and we will have some representatives from organizations who have divested come up and join us to tell us their story. But before I go further to introduce our panel to you, I would like to commit this event in prayer. I would like us to remember the crisis in the Holy Land, and also remember the crisis between the borders of Spain and Morocco. Join me as we say the Laudato Si prayer. I'm hoping that will come on screen as we say the Laudato Si prayer. Creator God, we thank you for the gift of life, which you lovingly wove into being. We confess we have not cared for your creation. Your world grows hotter, hungrier, and sicker, and the people and planet cry out for hope. In your love, Lord, we answer, for we know that things can change. Give us the courage to bring Laudato Si to life, to care for all communities and species suffering from environmental harm. Bless all who labor for the integral ecology, that they might inspire others to discover your face in our suffering and beautiful world. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Wonderful. So everyone, it's time to introduce our guests. I am so amazed with this with the panel we have today. I'll start off by introducing Bill Mckibben. As you all know, Bill is the author and an environmentalist, and he's also the founder of 350.org. He has won several prizes: the Gandhi Prize, the Thomas Merton Prize, and he's a renowned author. So happy to have you with us, Bill, and I'm glad you could join this panel. We're looking forward to your words of wisdom.
So good to be with you.
Thank you. I'd also like to introduce Claire Fosell. Claire is an environmental advisor at the advisor for Bristol Diocese and a trustee of the Hazelnut Community Farm. She's a Christian growing communities in Bristol. She's passionate about linking Christian faith with environmental action and has previously sat on the steering committee of Faith for the Climate. Thank you, Claire, for joining us. Next up, we have His Excellency, Bishop of Limerick, Brendan Leahy. His Excellency Brendan Leahy is an Irish prelate of the Catholic Church and has been with the Bishop of Limerick since 2013. He has served as a professor of systemic theology at Master Dei and also at St. Patrick's College in Maynooth. He's the author of numerous publications and articles on themes such as peace and forgiveness, ecumenism, and spirituality. Thank you so much, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
Wonderful. With us, we also have His Eminence, Cardinal Hollerich, joining us. And Cardinal Hollerich is Cardinal of Luxembourg and the President of the Bishops' Conference of the European Union. Cardinal Hollerich is the first cardinal from Luxembourg and has been the president of the Commission of Bishops' Conferences of the European Union since 2018. He was a professor of German, French, and European Studies and vice rector for General and Student Affairs at Sophia University. Thank you. And we also have from South Africa, where I'm based, we have Rhea Tubatla. Rhea serves with the Dennis Hurley Peace Institute in South Africa. Rhea has earned a degree in International Relations and Politics from the University of South Africa. She heads research and communication at the Dennis Hurley Peace Institute, focusing on the humanitarian conflict in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, and the displacement of people from their ancestral lands in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Rhea also serves as a volunteer host with the Catholic community radio station, Radio Veritas. Thank you so much for joining us, Rhea. And at this moment, we're pleased to share a video from the Vatican, Diocese of Human Development. Thank you.
Hello, best wishes and greetings from the Vatican Dicastery for promoting integral human development. We are Homo sapiens sapiens, but sometimes we can be schizophrenic. We know that the fossil fuels are causing the climate crisis and destroying our planet. Still, we keep on investing on the dirty fossil fuels. It is a physical imperative that we change course, that we divest. Science dictates us this course. It's also a moral imperative. Our own brothers and sisters around the world are already suffering due to the climate crisis, and we cannot push them to greater sufferings. And the future we would like to leave for our children. But it's also a theological imperative. Earth is God's creation, entrusted to our stewardship. We need to take care of God's creation. So let us be courageous. Let us divest. Pope Francis asked us to do it in the 2015 encyclical Laudato Si. The 2020 Vatican guidelines to implement Laudato Si very clearly mentions that we should not invest in companies that produce fossil fuels. And most recently, the Laudato Si Action Platform, the 7-year journey that the Church is inviting families, parishes, schools, universities, businesses, everyone to join, mentions that we need to refrain economically from any activity harmful to the planet and harmful to people. So let us listen to Pope Francis' invitation to divest from fossil fuels and protect our common home. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Father Josh. Such a wonderful call to action. We really appreciate that message. And indeed, we're going to go right into it and talk about fossil fuel divestments. And I'd like to ask you a question, Bill. Despite the growing fossil fuel divestment campaign, which you started, and the climate emergency and the biodiversity crisis, we still see the growth of the fossil fuel industry. And just yesterday, there was a really good announcement from the IEA that fossil fuel is not in our future. Why do you think that this is coming at this time? Why do you think that despite the arguments that fossil fuel does contribute to the climate crisis, there's still denialists out there?
Well, first of all, Lindland, let me just say thank you for letting me be part of this. It's very kind of you to let a Methodist and a mere Sunday school teacher at that in on this august gathering. But it's an opportunity, among other things, to say thanks to all the leaders within the Catholic Church who have made such amazing work to make divestment what's become the largest anti-corporate campaign in history. Look, the fossil fuel industry, as you say, remains strong, but it's nowhere near as strong as it was when this began 10 years ago. At that time, fossil fuel was the biggest industry in the world. Exxon was the single biggest company on planet Earth. And that's no longer the case. They're now besieged and embattled because of the work that people have done in many fronts, but divestment being a really important one. And you really got a sense of that yesterday when the International Energy Agency, the IEA, announced that if we were going to meet the targets that we set in Paris, then there was no room for any further new development of coal or oil or gas, which of course means no room to invest in coal or oil or gas. They were saying that the time has come for everyone to divest. The IEA can't speak to the moral questions here the way that Father Josh did, but it can definitely speak to the practical ones. And it's a reminder of how the world finally, at the very last minute, is beginning to coalesce around this need for change. I think you're muted, Lindland.
This was bound to happen. Thank you. So just to say that even though the IEA came out yesterday with this brilliant announcement, we still know that there's much to be done, yeah? And to end fossil fuels in our lifetime, not to talk of our children's lifetime. So what else can be done? Like movements like ours, movements, the Catholic movement, the faith-based movement, to accelerate the campaign to end fossil fuels?
Well, so Lindland, this is the key question here has everything to do with time. Climate change is the first time-limited test that human beings have really ever faced, where if we don't win very soon, we won't win at all, because no one has a plan for how you refreeze the Arctic once it's melted or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so what's important for us all to understand is that we have to move at very high speed. That's hard for institutions. And it's why it's so important that Pope Francis moved when he did 5 years ago. My sense of the Catholic Church is that it's such a big institution that it takes a little while for it to get fully in gear. But once it does, there's a kind of implacable, inexorable momentum that builds up. And that's the momentum that we desperately need now. We can't, the scientists have given us a deadline. They've told us that if by 2030 we haven't managed to cut emissions around this planet in half, then the chance of meeting those targets we set in Paris goes by the board forever. That's an enormous task, huge change. And one of the big levers that will make it happen is the withdrawal of financial support from the fossil fuel industry. So every diocese, every parish, every institution needs, not 5 years from now, needs this year to be taking this very simple, easy, cost-free step as one of its early commitments in what's going to be the most important battle of our lifetimes, maybe of any.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. And you mentioned Laudato Si, but last year also, the Vatican released the divestment guidelines. And as a non-Catholic, and as you mentioned that earlier on, what is the significance on this guidelines, on the broader divestment movements?
I lost you there for a minute.
Can you hear me now?
The guidelines for the divestment.
Yes. So what I was asking was that you mentioned that
the church has.
Go ahead, Bill. I think this is okay now.
Yes. Okay. Let me just say that it's extraordinarily important for the rest of. The Laudato Si itself was the most important document of this millennium about climate change and about a large number of other topics. But it allowed everyone to begin putting forward a series of action steps. And on those action steps, divestment is one of the easiest and most straightforward. And so it's really important that that example continue because it's being copied by people all over the world. Let me just end by saying that it's been remarkable. One of the things that happened is we've watched this rise of this remarkable children's movement, young people's movement around climate change and divestment. And if you wanted proof that the Holy Spirit was at work in the world, one could do worse than think about the fact that it's a Swedish schoolgirl, a young Swedish schoolgirl, and a not so young Argentinian Pope that are helping drive the movement forward to deal with this gravest of problems.
Thank you, Bill. Indeed, a Swedish schoolgirl and a not so young Argentinian Pope. And there are others who are also driving this movement, who have heeded to the call, and are really divesting. So I'm really pleased to share with everyone that on Monday we sent an announcement that 36 faith institutions from 11 countries have divested over the period of November up till now. And these institutions are from Brazil, Argentina, India, the Philippines, Uganda, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, Ireland, and the UK, and of course the United States. So we're so happy to announce these announcements. But just also to note that in the past couple of days, like exactly 5 days, we had 5 more institutions announce that they've divested from fossil fuels. And from the US, we have the Franciscan Friars, Holy Name Province. We also have the Midwest Province of the Society of Jesus. In Angola, we have the Luanda Archdiocesan Justice and Peace Commission. And from Italy, we have the Gruppo Missionera a Sego. Forgive me if I'm not speaking Italian properly. And then also, it's really amazing to note that the Associazione Comunità Papa Giovanni 23, which is an organization that has existed for 35 years, has also divested. This is an organization that gets at least 41,000 people on their tables every day, feeding them. So it's such a joy to announce that, to announce the world that divestment is happening and Catholic and faith-based institutions are heeding the call. I would like to call on our guest speaker now, Claire Fosell, from the Diocese of Bristol, who has been leading divestments in Bristol. Claire, how did you get the Diocese of Bristol to make a divestment commitment in 2021 and set a net zero target?
Well, thank you, Lyndon. It's wonderful to be here with you and join this fantastic event, and great to join with our sisters and brothers across the global Catholic climate movement. I'm the environmental advisor for the Diocese of Bristol, which is the Anglican diocese in the southwest of England, and it's one of 42 dioceses in the Church of England. And we were the first diocese to declare a climate emergency back in 2019 and to commit to being net zero by 2030. And we were also one of those 36 institutions that you mentioned, the faith groups that joined together as part of this global divestment commitment this Monday. And it's great to see that another 5 have joined just in the last few days. It makes sense for me to talk a little bit about our net zero commitment first, because it came first, but it also set the scene for the conversations around divestment that followed. And that net zero commitment came, interestingly, from a bottom-up process. It wasn't an edict that came from our sort of national church or Westminster. It was a group of volunteers in the diocese who had a real heart and passion for creation care that came together, formed an environment group, put together a policy that was then taken to our diocesan synod and approved. And that was the start of the process, as we had this environment policy that laid out very clearly what our commitments were. And at the same time, an individual church, they passed a motion for divestment at their PCC level, and they passed a declaration of a climate emergency. And then that was taken up to their deanery, which is a sort of grouping, a regional grouping of churches. And then that deanery passed the motion for climate emergency and took it up to the diocesan level, which then also agreed that it was time to declare a climate emergency and show that this was a priority. So it came from an individual church council right the way up to influencing the diocese. And then 3 months later, the diocesan representatives for the General Synod, so that's the national parliament of the Church of England, brought a successful amendment to their national debate around net zero, which committed the whole of the church in the UK to bring forward their decarbonisation target by 20 years, from 2050 to 2030. So it's been really exciting over the last few months to be part of this growing movement and growing momentum within the church towards decarbonisation and divestment. So while there were lots of forces at play and lots of prayer supporting this process, it's fair to say that in a matter of months, one church and their climate declaration had a domino effect that actually led to national policy change.
Wonderful. Claire, what an amazing journey there. Could I just take you a bit at the beginning? What was the turning point that sparked the urgent action to divest from fossil fuels? And along this journey, when you made that decision, what were the barriers, some of the barriers that you faced?
Well, in terms of our divestment decision, that sat within the context of having made ambitious environmental commitments. And so this was part of our response to that. When you publicly declare a state of climate emergency, that really kind of helps to oil the wheels of divestment and behind the scenes conversations of how to act. So we had worked out a baseline carbon equivalent of all of our investments. And then we submitted a divestment proposal to the Diocesan Finance Committee, and that was met immediately favourably. There was never a conversation about whether we should divest. It was always about, well, how, and working out the detail. Because I think that there's a real recognition, as Father Josh was saying, that there's a moral imperative as Christians to be acting and not to be funding fossil fuels that continue to degrade and to spoil our earth. So there was strong support for the principle, but concern around the practicalities, and those were the main barriers, really. For instance, people were worried about, well, what happens if we publicly divest, but then find that one or more of our funds might have acquired fossil fuel holdings without our knowledge, and how do we have guidelines around how to sell them and in what time frame? So it was very much just working through those logistical questions. So we invited our investment fund managers into the conversation and spoke with them about ensuring that anything that we had held with them would remain divested once we've made this commitment, and that in future we wouldn't be kind of trapped into holding fossil fuels. And they were very reassuring that if that were to happen, we'd be able to sell anything immediately. So that kind of gave everybody the sort of green light to go ahead. And so we've agreed to arrange the sale of any remaining holdings in fossil fuel companies if that were to happen. And following that conversation, the Finance Committee of the Diocese simply agreed the IRIS Foundation Principles for Divestment, which excludes companies that derive more than 10% of their revenues from the exploration or production of fossil fuels. And we were supported along that journey by Operation Noah, which is the Christian environmental charity in the UK, who've been really encouraging and supporting and pushing for this. And so it was so helpful to be part of that movement.
Thank you so much, Claire. And yes, Operation Noah has been brilliant at supporting organizations to divest. And of course, they're a key partner with us in this movement. Claire, just one last question from me. If you were to recommend to other dioceses to follow in your footsteps, what would be like maybe just 3 steps or 3 things that they must do to get into to actually divest from fossil fuel?
Well, I think the first thing is to really embed the divestment question within the broader moral imperative of the climate emergency and seeing it as a stepping stone in our response to decarbonising. Because as people of faith, we're called to care for God's creation and be good stewards. And part of that is to ensure that we're not doing harm to our world, either directly through our actions or indirectly through the money that we hold. And I think that once that argument's made, the conversation becomes a lot easier. I think the second thing is to make it very clear that as well as it being a moral imperative, there's very strong financial reasons to divest as well. I mean, it's just not a good investment that we know the stranded assets argument that means that our money isn't safe in fossil fuels. And there's the carbon bubble that means that when that bursts, it's not good stewardship to hold our church's money in fossil fuels. So the moral argument and the financial argument together just make it a no-brainer, and I think it makes it a lot easier for churches to take that step. Oh, I think you're muted again, Lynn.
Okay. Thank you so much, Claire, for leading this brilliant work on divestment. And we have also His Excellency Bishop Brendan from the Diocese of Limerick. But before I bring His Excellency on, can I just remind our guests and all those who have joined us that this session is being streamed in various languages. There are translations in various languages. So please do make sure that you use the language that you're most comfortable with. We have English, obviously, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, Polish, and Vietnamese. Thank you so much, everyone. And also, please remember to keep your questions and your comments, put them in the comment box. And Your Excellency, it's so good for you to join us, and we applaud the excellent work that you're doing in the diocese. And can we just ask of you, like, what is a prerequisite for the decision to divest, and also, most importantly, also important to make a public commitment on divestment from fossil fuels?
Well, first of all, thanks. I'm delighted to be here. 3 words occurred to me as the prerequisites: listening, learning, and acting. I do, like many people, try to live for a united world, but I am listening and hearing the cries, the cry of creation, the cry of young people, the cry of humanity itself today. And it's like a GPS giving us a direction. And Pope Francis is clearly highlighting that and telling us we need to take concrete actions. And Laudato is one major cry to us to act. Science is clear. Continuing use, Bill has said it, of fossil fuels as our major source of energy is unsustainable and is doing harm to our common home. We know that, for instance, just 100 fossil fuel companies are responsible for 70% of carbon emissions in our world. And these emissions, we know that, are contributing to global warming, which is driving the climate crisis. And then that brings with it a whole injustice that those least responsible for contributing to this crisis are suffering the most. And of course, no, it's not just one crisis. there's a cluster of crises in poverty, inequality, drought, famine, food insecurity. So then divestment from fossil fuels and reinvestment in renewable energy is clearly a way forward towards protecting our common home from climate change and pollution. It's a practical step to respond to the plight of humanity. As Pope Francis put it, we need this radical energy transition to save our common home. So here in Ireland, thanks to a 2-year campaign promoted by Troca, which is our overseas development agency in the Catholic Church in Ireland, Ireland became the first country in the world in 2018 to divest public money from the fossil fuel industry. At the same year, the Irish Bishops' Conference became the first Episcopal conference to announce it was divesting its shared assets in this whole fossil fuel area. And I know around Ireland, many dioceses are doing great work in promoting the Laudato Si agenda. So it became clear to me that we in our diocese too, we could not continue with investments in fossil fuel related funds. It was our way, as it were, to dare to care, as young people in a recent initiative of the United World Week put it. I like that expression. It's our way to dare to care, to take a step in this direction. So fossil fuel investment by our diocese became our step, our contribution, our first step.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And indeed, when you look at the wonderful example set by the Bishops' Conference of Ireland, that is a good example to follow. And just to say then, how would you praise all Catholic and faith institutions who have divested between a very short period from 2020 to current day? As counting, we have about 36 now who have 41 who have actually divested from November till now.
Well, I think first of all, we recognize we're not on our own. We're doing it together. Together we can make a difference. I mean, as Pope Francis and Laudato Si keep saying, everything is interconnected. So the decisions we make influence each other. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the step of testing, because we can show it's possible to change. It's possible to imagine another way. It's possible to reset our agenda. And I think in a way we can also help others think, well, if they're doing it, maybe we can do it. And I think that's a way of encouraging each other. And that's, I think, the importance of taking these steps. We give public encouragement to each other.
Thank you, Your Excellency. So can I just ask then, what you have divested and you've done that publicly, what next steps would you foresee and recommend for dioceses after divestments from fossil fuel? What is the next step of action?
Well, I suppose it's a first step, and a first step is important, but there are many other steps, and maybe even small steps. I was struck by a phrase that says, the slightest flap of a butterfly's wings is capable of causing a hurricane on the other side of the world. In other words, one little step can make a big difference. So I think the first thing for us is to be convinced that together we can reset and make a difference by taking small steps. Certainly the divestment decision is fundamental. It's a necessary step in our Laudato Si journey, but it's no means the end. Certainly we would have to move on, move our money out of this area. But the next thing will be to recognize we have to address fossil fuel dependence in the churches and church buildings across dioceses or parishes, and also to give our voice to in the efforts to end dependency on fossil fuel as part of living up to our global responsibilities. I would say this, I think it's important we don't just focus on the divestment, because that would be a risk of compartmentalizing ecological conversion as something specific or extra to do with fuel or energy. Everything is interconnected, we keep saying that. Everyone is interconnected. So the care for the earth, the divestment, is linked with social, the promotion of the family, fraternity, outreach to existential peripheries. So I think, yes, we are faced with one single complex sociological environmental crisis, but it has to do with all the aspects of our lives and parishes, movements, associations, religious orders. So all together in our little steps are making a response. This is very important. Practical things. For instance, in places we could write pastoral letters, put on interviews like this, put it up on our website, actually give information to people, share the wisdom of Laudato Si, in all the modern social media that we have in our diocese. But I think we also need to attract the heart. It's not just enough to give the vision, very important, the imagination, very important. We need to attract the heart. And there, I think, moments of prayer, liturgy, poetry, reflection. For instance, we have the season of creation and Laudato Si week. I think they're weeks for us to put on moments of prayer, reflection of the heart, and that'll attract people. But then action, definitely action. We can certainly, all of us, review our lifestyle, that's for all of us, but also little steps separating waste, taking part in solidarity initiatives, avoiding use of plastic items, cooking only as much as we need to eat, treating each other with care, so very important, promoting family life, turning off unnecessary lights. Certainly, I would say at the moment, a particular initiative might be that of supporting the call to make the COVID-19 vaccine a common good for all, shared across borders. That's the very important step to take. But of course, recognizing this is the last point, we don't do all of this on our own. We have many people help us, and I think we have the Laudato Si goals, which are being launched at the end of this Laudato Si week. That's a 7-year roadmap to help us. It gives us definite direction, which is dioceses, many church institutions. So I think that too will be a way forward for us in this first step of divestment.
Monsignor, thank you so much, and for giving us, a vast array of alternatives that do not involve fossil fuel. And indeed, the Laudato Si Action Platform will be launched at the end of this week. That offers the church and all religious bodies, a huge range of activities that they can join into, move further away from fossil fuel. Thank you so much. And at this moment, also, I would like to introduce Your Eminence, His Eminence Cardinal Hollerich. He is the President of Comesse and also the Archbishop of Luxembourg. Cardinal, it's such a pleasure to have you with us, Your Eminence. Please, can you just share with us why you think it's so important for Catholic and faith institutions to keep on? We have seen that, the 41 institutions that have divested since November, but why can't we stop now? Why is it important to keep on divesting? And also, in your opinion, what is the impact that we are making?
Thank you. So first, please do not call me Your Eminence, but just Cardinal. I think that's closer to Christ. We are in a situation of urgency. I mean, we now understand better how climate change is evolving. And if we do not act now, it will be too late. Some processes will start, which we will not be able to stop. So we have to act. And we know that a fossil fuel is one of the main reasons. So that's a very easy point to start, in fact. I think we have to change our lifestyle, but that's much more difficult. So let us start with something which is easier. And as church or faith-based organization, we have a moral duty to do it. Because we have to do it out of love of God and out of love for our neighbors. God created this world. So how can we say, my God, I love you in prayer, if we do nothing in order to maintain his creation? How can we say we love our neighbor and we know by Fratelli Tutti that neighbor is not just the person living next to me in Luxembourg, but my neighbor are the people in South Africa, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, and in all the countries. And they will suffer more than people in Europe by climate change. So we have to enact this, let's say, human brotherhood, sisterhood, and we have to do it now. Otherwise, it's to change. And we have to start with simple things. And I think disinvesting from fossil fuel, as compared to other things we also should do, is in fact the easiest point. It's a start. And we cannot, in Commerce, for instance, applaud the European Union for their Green Deal if we do not support it in our own lifestyle, in our own way of doing. If we do not do this, our message, our proclamation of Christ, of the gospel, nobody will believe it at the end. They will say, you are among the people who could have changed and didn't do anything. So I think it's very urgent action we have to take.
Thank you, Cardinal Horig. And we know about the amazing work that you have done leading the Archdiocese of Luxembourg and Commerce into divestments. Apart from what you mentioned, and you talked about social justice, and you talked about your neighbor, not just being the one in Luxembourg, but also being in South Africa. Why did you lead these initiatives, and how can you really? I see the comments coming out where Catholics are asking, how do we do this? How do we lead dioceses to actually divest?
I mean, bishops are very busy people. They have to look at 100 different things at the same time. So they will turn their attention to things which people, because the church are the baptized, the people of God, which they tell their shepherds. So write to your bishop, tell them about it. I think they are happy. And I think bishops normally are not young people. So, but we are like grandfathers. And grandfathers normally listen to their granddaughters and grandsons. They have a very close relation to their granddaughters and grandsons. So please, the young people, tell your grandfather bishop about his investment.
Brilliant. That's a direct call to action. Definitely, everyone listening, I hope you've gotten that message, that just tell them exactly that they should divest. My next question, Cardinal Hollerich, is actually around something that Bishop Leahy also addressed. It's around the Laudato Si action platform. Indeed, it's a tricky road ahead for clean investments for faith-based institutions. Can you just elaborate a bit more around the role of the Laudato Si action platform for clean investments?
No, it's clear that dioceses have to handle money. So they have to invest the money. It is necessary that priests and other workers for the church will get their pay. So it's part of the business of a local church, of a bishop. And some people think, when I spoke first about this investment, they say, yes, but no, we should make as much money as possible and then use that money for doing good. I think that's a big temptation because it's completely wrong. You must act in conformity with the social teaching of the church. And we are completely incredible. I mean, if we speak out, if we proclaim the gospel, and at the other hand, we do not just do anything. So that's very far-reaching. It means that you can get less money than before. And you have to accept that and be happy with it. Because the good that you wanted to do later on with the money, you can already do it now by disinvesting and by investing in other branches. In Luxembourg, for instance, we have some housing projects because to invest our money. So which houses are we building? Which material do we use? How is our building houses affecting climate change? What do we do for the protection of climate? These are all things that we have to consider. Otherwise, I think our message of the gospel, just people cannot believe it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cardinal, for those really inspirational words. Cardinal, my last question to you is around this year. We have two major events, COP26 on climate change and the climate crisis, and the biodiversity COP15. And yes, a lot of Catholic institutions are divesting now, but most have not. And in the light of all these critical opportunity moments coming up for this year, what would you say that Catholics and people of faith should do around these political moments, both to inspire the divestment or to get a broader divestment movement?
No, I think that would be the good occasion for all the dioceses, faith-based organizations who haven't yet decided on this investment to do it. Because we know politicians. Politicians sometimes have very good ideas. And you have many idealists among politicians. But they will always look to their electorate. And if the electorate does not push, let's say, all the measures against climate change, they will do something, but not enough. So in order that politicians do enough, we and the church is based on citizen level. Huh? We are not on state level. We have to show the politicians that it's our true desire. And that it also means that we accept perhaps a loss of income for saving the planet. That seems very banal, very simple. But I think that politics function like that. So we have to show, as grassroots Christians belong to the grassroots, even bishops, cardinals belong to the grassroots, we have to show that this is important for us. And we show it not just by our lips having beautiful sentences, but we show it by concrete plans of disinvestment, of investing into other energy or branches, and showing that we even are ready, yes, we are ready to lose money in order to gain life. Life not just for us, but life for our sisters and brothers on the whole earth. And I think the crisis is very high. We have to act. Because others, oh yes, we have to do something, but perhaps tomorrow. No, we have to do it now. Tomorrow is too late. So I think we should really, and you know our Pope. Now we know that the Holy See is working with body and soul for that purpose. It would be good if we in the dioceses and faith-based movements, if we could give support to our Pope, to Francis, for helping him to that save, together with so many people who are not Christian, who are Christians but not Catholic, that all together we do a big effort for our planet and for people living on this planet.
Thank you so much, Cardinal Hoderick. What inspiring words. And yes, I agree with you. It is not banal at all. Divesting from fossil fuel is not a banal action. It's far, it's actually a commitment to care for our common home and our common life. And we must do it now. Thank you for those very inspirational words. And
I just forgot to apologize for my English. I'm not a native English speaker, so I think it's my fourth foreign language now.
I join you in that, Cardinal. I join you in that. I'm definitely not a native speaker also, so we're in the same boat together on this. Thank you. So I'd like to bring on Rhea to the scene now. And Rhea, thank you for being with us. Rhea is from the Dennis Hurley Peace Institute. And Rhea, we know that you've been working, as I said in my introduction earlier on the Mozambican conflict. And, sometimes, I hope a very long time ago, the fossil fuel industry could be painted as the panacea for development and a golden industry that fosters development in many nations. It is actually a dirty industry. There is that dirty nature of the industry, even beyond the climate crisis, onto human rights abuse, etc. Can you just share with us your experiences on this, especially in relation to Mozambique and other parts of the world? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Lyndon. So, within the Dennis Hurley Peace Institute, we do work specifically with countries outside of South Africa. We are based in South Africa. We work under the auspices of the South African Catholic Bishops' Conference, but we do all of our work outside the borders of South Africa. In Mozambique specifically, at the moment dealing with the crisis, one of the things that we have come to see and come to recognize as a very big problem is the liquid natural gas plant in Afungi, which is in Palma. It's just off the coast of, what's on the coast of Mozambique. And there, Total had built an entire plant to extract liquid natural gas from the channel between Mozambique and Madagascar. Now, with the crisis that there is now in Mozambique, with the insurgency that is happening in Mozambique, Total last week came out with a statement to say that they are going to be stripping that plant. So they went into a place that was beautiful. It was ecologically, it was very, very diverse. It was a land that people that were using for pastoral purposes. It was the ancestral home of a lot of people, and they were moved off of that land with no financial recourse. Their right to the land that they had lived on for centuries as families was stripped from them. The land was built up to house this liquid natural gas extracting plant, and now in the last week, we now learn that it will be dismantled and moved from Mozambique to a small little island off of the coast of Mozambique that belongs to France called Mayotte. So now Total will be basically doing double the work and messing up the ecology of two different places. They've already messed up the ecology in Mozambique. In places like Palma and in Mocimboa de Praia, there are mangrove forests that are being decimated because of the amount of pollution that there is there, and people have now had to use that water in the mangrove forests for sustenance, because they can no longer access their fresh water sources that they used to be able to access because of the Total plant that was in Afungi. So Total is now moving from there to Mayotte, and we presume that they'll be repeating the process again in a much smaller place. So it will have an even bigger impact on the ecology and on the environment there. And in doing this, then we have a situation whereby big conglomerates basically at will, with the backing of governments, yes, but at will go and decimate ecologies and people's lives. They disrupt people's lives, because when we speak about climate change and when we speak about the climate crisis, it's not just the earth for the sake of the earth. We are people. We are Homo sapiens sapiens, as Father Josh said. We live on this planet, and we all have a right to belong to those lands that we belong to. And people are being divested and being stripped of lands that they call home. And so that's where we are in Mozambique. However, being in South Africa as well, South Africa has a very, very, very big coal mining industry in a province called Mpumalanga, which, you know, Lindland, for you and I, it's about 80 kilometers away from, from where we are. And there is a huge crisis there as well, because in a town called Emalahleni, which directly translates to the place of coal, the residents there are suffering from chronic diseases, chronic lung diseases such as asthma and chronic bronchitis and chronic pneumonia. You know, people are being admitted to hospital repeatedly for pneumonia and bronchitis and asthma and all this sort of stuff. And that comes from the absolute dirty air that they have to live in. There was a news report a few weeks ago, an in-depth news report by one of our investigative newspapers, and in some houses, the furniture is covered with a black soot. So that you cannot extract all of these fossil fuels from the earth and burn coal for electricity as we do here, and not have it have a direct negative impact on people, on animals, on plants, on water that is around where you do that.
Yeah, Rhea, thank you for shedding a light on the evils, the ills of the fossil fuel industry, and gracias to the Institute on how you're working with these communities at the front line who have been directly affected by fossil fuel companies. I would like to also just ask you, you know, there are a lot of faith-based institutions and communities in Africa who are working tirelessly to end the fossil fuel industry. Can you just shed more light about that, and also just specifically? We have a vast audience from all over the world, and how can the global community support the resilience of communities in Africa and other parts of the world who are at the who are facing the direct impact of the fossil fuel industry?
Well, yes, yeah, I mean, you're right. There are plenty. There are innumerable NGOs, NPOs that work in this space. I mean, currently ourselves at the moment we have volunteers from Mozambique, from Mexico, who have been placed in Mozambique to assist with the crisis that we're dealing with there. We have another volunteer from your home country, from Cameroon, who's also here with us until the end of the year. So there is a symbiosis, and there is an exchange of ideas and resources that we do try to have between us and those other faith-based organizations across the continent that deal with climate change, as well as you know, just human suffering and all that sort of stuff. How can people at the coalface help? I think particularly in the Catholic Church, the Office of Justice and Peace is available and is present in every diocese. Certainly in South Africa, certainly in the countries in Southern Africa. I don't know about the rest of the world, but I'm assuming that it is. So things like justice and peace are a very easy tool for people to reach out to say, how do I help? What are the programs that are being done at diocese level to assist in dealing with issues of climate change and divestment, because it's things like justice and peace that are able to propel forward the movement of the church in terms of divestment and things like that.
Thank you, Rhea. Earlier on, you mentioned that you know, in Limpopo, we can see the health effects of coal mining. A report came out earlier on this year that talked about fossil fuel, the fossil fuel industry causing about 8.7 million deaths globally. However, we still see the massive infrastructure and development push in quotes, of the fossil fuel industry in Africa. And how can the global Catholic community build resistance, to these infrastructure projects?
I think one of the easiest ways to do that is to continue to speak, continue to use our voice. The advantage that the Catholic Church in Africa specifically has is that it is quite often seen as the bulwark of morality and the beacon for a lot of people when they're dealing with issues of what is and what should and what shouldn't be done in their immediate environments. So if we can continue as the Catholic Church, as the different bishop conferences across Africa, I'm speaking about Africa specifically, of course, if we can continue to use our voice, because our voice also lends a very big voice to the politics of wherever we are, So if we can continue to use our voice to speak out against the greed that drives the need to have fossil fuels, I think that's the way that we can then sort of move towards a place and a situation where people open their eyes and see that fossil fuels will do nothing but destroy the planet and destroy all of us.
Thank you so much, Rhea. This is really shedding a light on the ills and the dirty fossil fuel industry as we know it. We're going to take some questions now from our audience. Some comments have come in, and I'll invite the speakers to weigh in, our panelists, our August panelists to weigh in on this. Maybe the first question I would like to ask Bill, how does divestment work to create change? Can you just shed a light on that, and why it's so important to continue and grow divestment commitments? Thank you.
Sure. Lindland, thank you. And what a brilliant conversation this has been. Look, the divestment campaign has historical roots. When we started it, we were drawing on the work that people did a generation ago around apartheid in South Africa. And one of the very first people that we talked to was Desmond Tutu, the Anglican Archbishop of South Africa, who had been at the forefront of that work in the time of apartheid. And what he said was, please now take this same tool and apply it to the climate fight, because it is the human rights challenge of this era, for all the reasons that people have laid out. Now, the divestment by itself is not the only answer to the climate challenge. That's why people are doing so many other things too, and all around the world, including today, standing up in indigenous communities to block pipelines, on and on and on. But it's a really powerful tool, and one way you can tell that for sure is that the fossil fuel companies hate it. In fact, Shell Oil, which I think is the second biggest oil company in the world, said in its annual report a year ago that divestment had become a material risk to its business, which is good because in its current form, Shell's business is a material risk to the planet and everybody on it. But it's a reminder of just how effective this is. Effective for two reasons, really. One, it takes away the social license of these companies. It's been a key part of helping people everywhere understand their role, not only in causing the climate crisis with their product, but in prolonging it with this endless disinformation campaign that they've carried out for the last 30 years. The second reason that it's effective is, and this becomes clearer every time this gets, movement gets larger, is that it's now constraining their ability to access capital for expansion. And this is entirely clear now in the coal industry and increasingly true in oil and gas. There are just too many funds, too many players that won't any longer support them financially. In America, our most famous stock analyst, a guy who goes on TV every night named Jim Cramer, devoted 2 episodes last year of his program to explaining to people that there was no longer any reason to even try and invest in fossil fuel because the divestment campaign had gotten so large that really it couldn't make serious money over the long-term future. And I'll just end by saying one of the reasons that the divestment campaign has gotten easier is that not only is it the morally right thing to do, at this point, it's clearly the financially right thing to do as well. Those who heeded the call to divest when we first made it ended up with lots more money in their endowments and portfolios to do the good things, educate students, run hospitals, all the things that we need endowments and portfolios for, because the fossil fuel industry underperformed every other part of our economy over the last decade. And the reason for that is clear. One, the product that they're selling is wrecking the earth, so of course they're going to come under heavy regulatory pressure. And 2, thank heaven, smart people around the world have figured out how to take the sun and the wind and produce the same product as the fossil fuel companies, energy, but much cleaner and now much cheaper. And so, we live in a moment when we can, I'm no theologian, but it's nice to live in a moment when we can move from energy from down below to energy from up above and do it in ways that help us financially, practically, morally, in health terms, in every other way.
Thank you so much, Bill. Indeed, energy from up above. And you have shared with us that divestment is effective. It's actually working. It's the moral thing to do, but it also makes financial sense. And Cardinal Holrick, I know you mentioned this, you talked about this before, but there are questions and comments coming up from our audience about, like Catholic parishioners really want to divest, but they need guidance on what they can do to actually move the authorities, the diocesan authorities, to actually divest. So in the light of all of this, it is morally right. It makes financial sense in terms of the money and energy from above. What can Catholic parishioners really do to shift authorities to divest?
First, they can do something in their own parish, because the parishioners are in charge of their own parish. So they in the council, they can take decisions. And if they are not in the councils, they can ask the people they elected on the council to act. But I also think that bishops are very open for that. But sometimes they might be afraid losing money. They have to ask for the economic council of the diocese, and they are perhaps afraid for asking for such a thing. So it's good. Please pay a visit to your bishops. I think many bishops are very happy when people come up to them and speak with them, because the big danger of being a bishop is that if you do not do an effort, you live in a world of administration, of different councils, and you live in a clerical world. And you can help your bishop to get out of that, to be in touch with reality. And nothing is more real than climate change. And you can still tell your bishop that God is present in reality, much more than in our dreams. So it's a chance for the church.
Thank you, Cardinal Holrick. And indeed, we've seen the great examples coming up from Claire and Bishop Leahy. And so in terms of, practical step, another question that has come up is that how do we support as a body options from fossil fuel, alternatives to fossil fuel. And I know we've talked about the Laudato Si action platform, but Claire, can I just ask you then, in that, like, what did you do to make sure that alternatives were present in your divestment decision?
That's a good question. It's not just about divesting, but it's also about making responsible investment choices so that you're actively investing in the future that you want to see. And I don't think that we're quite there yet. I think we're still on that journey, but I would very much advocate investing in renewable alternatives, putting money into renewable energy, which will create a greener and fairer future for all. And I think there's also the question around a just transition. And this is something that's going to be discussed more at the COP26 summit at the end of the year. There's hundreds of thousands of jobs in fossil fuels, particularly in the global south. And how do we support developing countries in particular to leapfrog over that whole stage of development needing fossil fuels and develop a green alternative future? And I think that it's the responsibility and the duty of more developed countries to support the governments of more developing countries in providing alternatives and providing particularly green jobs to support that transition so that there isn't unemployment, there isn't entrenched poverty as a result of moving away from fossil fuels. It doesn't need to be. There can be a green alternative.
Thank you, Claire. And we have seen that that just transition debates and dialogue is very active in the global south and in South Africa, where I believe you've engaged in this. And I would like to share your perspective to ensure that that the just transition actually happens for workers who have been stuck in the fossil fuel industry and those who are dependent on it. What are your perspectives on this, Claire?
Oh, sorry, is it for me?
I'm sorry,
Ria?
it's for Ria. My apologies for Ria, from Ria. Thank you.
No problem. I think for workers who are working in the fossil fuel industry, the most important question at the top of their minds is, naturally, will I have a job tomorrow? Will I be able to support my family tomorrow? And I think it's something that we need to continue to have dialogues with labor unions and worker union representatives to say, we need to start moving from the fossil fuel industry into a more sustainable, more renewable energy field. To do that, we need to start capacitating people to be able to move from, for example, coal to wind power. And so I think it's that thing where there needs to be excuse me, just something in my throat. In South Africa, we have this wonderful saying, it's called the public-private partnership, the PPP, where government needs to come to the table and say, here are funds to maybe for capacitation and job training. And then the private sector also needs to come to the table and say, we will continue to employ you because that is what people want. So we then need to, as faith-based organizations, as NGOs, we just need to make sure that we are able to stand in the gap for a lot of people who are voiceless, so that the people who have pockets are able to open their pockets and see that they will be assisting people by capacitating them and moving them from a dirty industry such as fossil fuel into a more sustainable industry of renewable energy.
Yes, indeed. And I just want to also mention that, yes, just transition is happening, and indeed, Catholics should be also having these conversations around, where do we put our money? And so there are a lot of organizations and in institutions like Catholic Impact Investing on Collaborative and Faith Invest organizations who are really leading the dialogue and creating space on the investment side, on clean investment. So I encourage everyone to join in these conversations around where we put our money in clean energy and other investment alternatives. So there we have it. I am so grateful and I'm honored to thank you all for this brilliant conversation that has shed a light on Catholic and faith divestments. And I'd just like to encourage everyone to join the Faith Divest Reinvest workshop, which would happen sometime in September. Well, in September, we'll communicate the dates. So keep an eye out on our social media for these dates. And we'll also be communicating communicating the date for the next divestment. Now we have it, the next divestment announcement. Now we have it tentatively scheduled for October 2021. So please make sure all Catholic institutions and faith-based institutions out there who, in case you're wondering when should I divest, please make sure that you contact GCCM, Operation Noah, all the partners who we're working on to be able to support you in this next move of divestment. And you can always go on our website and get more details on that. And so a great thanks to all the partners who have worked with us leading up to this divestment announcement, which came out on Monday and which we've talked about today. Green Faith, Operation Noah, and all the other partners working with us behind the scene. I also want to just give a vote of thanks to an amazing panelist. It's just been humbling for me to be able to host you all and have such a rich conversation on a topic so pertinent to our common home, coming off the back of the Laudato Si guidelines. And I also want to thank the Dicastery for Human Development who are hosting this with us, and just thank the GCCM team who have worked with us behind the scene and to make this webinar possible. And thank you to all our guests who have joined us from all over the world. And I hope this has been enlightening for you, as it has been for me. And I'm wishing you a happy Laudato Si week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.